the Stage, Episode 31, Darin and Aellorah again.
In order for the podcast to continue, I really need more guests to volunteer to be on the show. So if you're interested, or if you know someone who is interested, please go to gocorral.com/SDS to learn more about how to apply to be on the show. That's GOCORRAL.com/SDS.
Hey,
Darin. How you doing?
pretty good.
Welcome back.
Been a while.
Yeah. How you been?
Pretty good. Lot going on in the last year and a half or so.
Yep.
Moved jobs and started training at this place called the Knights Hall that does sword training, and been using that to try to get more active, get out of the house more, and been a lot of fun, but very expensive.
Mm-hmm. Is that related to like the cosplay Society for Creative Anachronism stuff you're doing?
Kinda. Not really. It's not really cosplay. They do actual training.
Okay. So it's more like stage fighting?
They put on shows where they get, all dressed up in full armor and just beat the hell out of each other with blunt weapons.
Okay. I feel like SCA does that for
Yeah,
some of their stuff.
it's more or less SCA. I think that the minutia of the rules varies between different variants of the sport.
Yeah. Yeah. One of my classmates from high school is actually a stage fight instructor now, which is
That's
neat.
cool.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's more than just sword fighting, because it's all about falling and how to pretend to punch someone.
Yeah.
And he posts some of the videos of his stuff on Facebook, and then I now can see it in actual shows where it's like, but you didn't punch him. Why is he falling down? Oh wait, they're just pretending, and dude, I'm supposed to be fooled by it, but now I can see it in it.
Yeah, right now I'm working on trying to finish up a set of lamellar armor that I'm making specifically for sparring.
Okay, cool. What are you doing? Leather and
leather.
Plates, or
metal would have been a lot more expensive, but leather, I gotta tell you, cutting, I think I'm up to 360 plates now, by cutting them by hand. It was murder on my hands, and I think I've put 80 hours into this project at this point.
Yeah.
It's
such a higher quality that's expected for that stuff now. People used to just make stuff out of duct tape and soda cans.
Yeah, I feel like I can't go to any Ren Fair anymore without seeing a pattern by Prince Armory or Black Raven Academy, and that's pretty much the standard. If you can't be up to par with people who make stuff that looks professional like that, then I mean, people still give you attention because it's cool if you've made your own stuff. But honestly, I think it's cooler to see people who have made their own patterns rather than just use pre-made patterns.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it does feel like the experience now is it used to be that professional look would stand out, and now it just feels like it kind of blends in.
Yeah.
And you kind of stand out if you look ugly now.
Yeah.
Or if you do some giant Warcraft kind of thing for the look that you're doing.
Yeah, last year, a YouTube channel that I follow that I really love, he was doing this contest where it was like a LARP contest where they partnered with this company called Bergschneider that does that produces a lot of period clothing, and they were doing a contest where they wanted people to modify the clothing to make it look special, and the winner would get a trip out to Germany for Conquest of Methodia, this huge LARP event. And
oh right, yeah, I remember you talking about that.
Yeah, I participated, but I didn't really do very well because I at the time I didn't realize that the goal was to modify the actual garment from Bergschneider rather than do what I did, which is make a full set of armor.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Oops.
Oh well.
Yeah. Maybe another time.
Yeah, they're doing it again this year, so maybe I'll get another chance.
All right. Yeah, that'd be cool. For work, you're doing software stuff, right?
Yeah. Funny thing is, so the job that I previously had, I work as a software engineer. I was working for a company that makes the scanners that they use at checkpoints and airports, and they went through a round of layoffs, and I ended up going to the competition. So
All right. I mean, that works out for you, I guess.
Yeah, and it was the easiest transition I've ever had between jobs, so that was nice.
Yeah.
It's definitely a lot less stressful day to day than it was at the previous company. I mean, that could just be because I'm newer to the company and I haven't really been thrown into the thick of it yet.
Yeah. Well, yeah, you want to talk about your campaign. So last time it was Aellorah, and that was the Seven Sisters campaign.
Yep.
Let's have you give like a brief overview for reminder for people who might have listened to episode 11 a year and a half ago is what you said. Sounds about right.
So yeah, the elevator pitch for Aellorah was just that, it started off as a single world with a star system around it, where that is, the only star system in all of existence. The rest is just this endless void. And this planet, Aellorah, has 7 well springs on it, which occasionally erupt like a volcano, and they produce magical anomalies all over the world that, it could be anything from, like, on the continent of Mir, there's an anomaly which makes it so that the entire continent, the climate is always spring. It never changes.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember that we talked about, how that would affect like plant life and their ability to grow crops. And
Yep. Mm-hmm.
then, there's more nuanced anomalies that I've created that are, more than just like environmental effects at this point. Because, I try to come up with at least one anomaly like every couple of weeks. And,
Mm-hmm.
not all of them, it's more just like a creative exercise than planning to actually put them into the world. But, I have anomalies like the Whispering Abyss, where it's this region of the ocean, like 50 miles in diameter, that just if you were to put your head under the water, you would hear whispering in your head that just drives you mad, and you end up, just kind of diving into the ocean and just disappearing.
Oh, kind of like a siren effect.
Yeah, kind of. And I've actually been spending more time developing that one specifically recently because that particular anomaly has to do with a new demigod / warlock patron that I introduced specifically for one player.
Okay. All right. Yeah. Let's get to that later. I did want to talk about the other gods part. Yeah, I remember the Eternal Spring continent Mir was what you said, right? The wellspring there and how it makes it always spring.
Yeah.
And us talking about like, our world has evolved to have seasons, and a lot of animals have their life cycle based around seasons, and how disruptive that would be to animals on that continent to not have that.
Yeah, I still haven't put a whole lot of thought into the, flora and fauna on the world. I've been spending a lot of time working on the magic system and the pantheon and things like that. But I definitely want to get to it eventually. And definitely one of the things I've been spending a lot of time on in the last year is like materials, like metals. So
Mhm.
I have been trying to flesh out more of these settlements around the world. Even though the players are, in one particular location, I'm trying to eventually have some details for every settlement on the map, which it's a staggering amount of work, but it's fun,
Yeah.
doing a little bit of unique world building for each location and trying to tie it into the rest of the world.
Yeah. I think Calamar did that at one point. They have a map that lists like every town that's over 200 people or something.
Oh, wow. That's a lot.
It's intense. And Calamar isn't quite a whole. Actually, I guess it's 2 continents. There is a subcontinent. That's part of it.
Yeah, one thing I've been doing to supplement the world building and to kind of zhuzh up my campaign is obviously AI has become a really big thing in the last couple of years, and I've been using Midjourney to generate images of like the characters that the players encounter and locations that they go to, and just random things if I think that it's picturesque and would be worth showing a visual for. I'll try to generate an image.
Yeah, I've had some real trouble with the image generators, but Midjourney stuff has looked really good when I've seen
Yeah,
it.
I've been using it long enough now to where I'm not a master of using it, but I know it well enough where I can get something that I'm looking for within, maybe 10 revisions of the prompt.
Yeah. Yeah. Usually for me, it's something like 10 to 100 to get what I want, and even then, it's not quite there.
Yeah.
There's just some things it doesn't seem to understand what I'm saying.
Yeah, another thing is that Midjourney specifically just changed their model to a new version that changed how prompting works. So a lot of what people used to use for their prompts doesn't really work in the same way anymore. So it's a little confusing, but yeah, I mean, I've been populating the interactable map that I have on World Anvil with, information about each settlement and a picture of it, and so that's been really fun.
All right, cool.
Still spending a lot of time at work, doing
Yes.
this.
Yeah. A lot of my best writing happens in the bathroom at work.
Yeah.
So, Aellorah, as I remember it, there's the sun, there's the earth, or Aellorah, whatever we want to call it. There's 3 moons.
Yeah.
And each of those 5 celestial bodies is represented by a goddess.
Yep.
And then there's 2 other goddesses that represent life and death. Am I remembering everything there right?
Yes.
Okay.
And then there's 3 other planets besides Aellorah that I've gone into a little bit of detail for each one, enough that, I have something to work with later down the line, but obviously it's not the focus of what I'm working on.
Yeah, it's what I remember. It seemed like you were doing sort of Aellorah is sort of the mammal continent, I guess, and then you have the lizard, not continent, world, and then you have the lizard world and the bird world, from what I remember.
Yeah, so Aellorah is where, you have the humanoids. Then Proxon is where you have the dragon type, like there were the dragonborn kobolds, lizard folk, and Yuan-Ti. And then I still haven't decided. I came up with a name for it, but I'm probably going to change it. I called it Ikar Terev, where it's a planet that doesn't have any well springs on the surface, and as a result, because of what I'm going to talk about later, it doesn't have access to the energy that's used for magic. So there's no magic available on that planet.
Oh, okay.
And that's the planet where I think I said in the last time I talked about it that it was going to be Aarakocra and Kenku, and then I also decided there would be Harengon.
Mm-hmm.
And then the 4th planet also gave a name, but honestly, I think it's stupid, so I'm not going to go with that one. But this one was supposed to be undeveloped, but I decided that the dark god Ymir, the god of the void, he's like plotting something there, and he has a secret race hidden under the surface, which I decided would be changelings, and I would call them metamorphs.
Oh, okay.
And he was going to basically raise them to infiltrate Aellorah to destroy their society.
Okay. Man, that has like a couple different things that I wanted to comment on that. So one of them for the void god having his own planet and being like, scheming on it. And I just talked about this with a coworker of mine, the Lunar games. Did you ever play those?
The Lunar games?
Yeah, there were video games that came out like in the early 90s, I think. Anyways, there's a god that's on another planet, an evil god that's like trapped there and scheming to try and make his way back to the real planet. Small similarity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've tried to spend a lot more time like making the Pantheon a little more nuanced, and it's taken some time because obviously I have to spend a lot of time focusing on the development of the campaign, and that takes a lot of time as it is, and with everything else that I'm starting to add to my schedule, I kind of just have to laser focus on the campaign first and make sure that that's ready for the next session, and then I can do all the extra stuff.
Okay, so I wanted to talk a bit more about the gods in your campaign before we got into your campaign, like your campaign events that have changed since last time. Because I remember last time you said like there's the 7 goddesses and then there's the void god, and that it seemed like originally that was like your conception was just those 8.
Yeah.
But then in our last interview, you mentioned two other gods in our last interview. There was the god of the dragon planet.
Yeah.
And there was another like poison god who was the son of the void god.
Yeah. Yeah. So there's Proxus, who is the dragon god.
Mm-hmm.
So the story behind him was actually that he was created by Lys, the goddess of life. And so she was just trying to create sort of like a proto-draconic creature on Proxon, the second planet, because they were starting to expand to other planets to try to, populate them. And while she was creating Proxus, Maven, the goddess, Maven, the god of corruption, hatred, and poison that I mentioned, he was previously unknown to the Seven Sisters, and he made his, grand debut by appearing to her, and he corrupted Proxus. And so originally there was like I tried to come up with a few different variations of his origin story, but originally I was thinking of Lys and Maven as his parents almost in a way, because they were both kind of had a hand in his creation. They're not literally his parents, but it's that's kind of the route I was going with. And
yeah, not like sexual, but more like sort of co-authors kind of with how they created him. Yeah.
And so, obviously Proxus was corrupted by this attack, and Lys left him on Proxon, and initially nothing seemed to be wrong, but over time, as he began to create his own life forms, which are the four races that I mentioned that are on Proxon,
right.
Each one has some serious flaw, and this would kind of enrage Proxus, who he just seems to get very frustrated with his failures, and that kind of frightened Lys, and Proxus was begging Lys for her to help him to try to figure out what went wrong, and she decided to abandon him there. And ever since he went into hibernation. He's kind of hoping that one day she'll return to help him figure out what went wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And meanwhile, the four races of that planet are just kind of a disaster.
Gotcha. Yeah, that's. I'm always making connections for stuff. That sounds like the sort of the opposite for Morgoth, isn't it? Yeah, so Sauron is like sort of an angel, and Morgoth is the devil.
Well, I think that they were both. I think that they were both Maya, weren't they?
No,
or Maiar,
no. Sauron was a Maya, and Morgoth is one of the gods, the Valar.
Oh, all right.
So yeah, there's different levels. There's like the god Ea, who does nothing except create the Valar and then leave. Then there's the Valar, who are like gods, and then there's the Maiar, who are like angels or demons. So Balrogs are all Maiar. Yeah, anyways, we're not really supposed to be talking about that. We're supposed to be talking about your campaign, but like the Proxus sounds exactly the opposite of Morgoth, where he like hates creation and wants to make all these ugly things to show how ugly creation is. And instead you have this guy who's sort of accidentally making ugly things and doesn't like it and wants help, whereas Morgoth is trying to sort of corrupt other people by coming in and saying, hey, you want some help with that? And then messing it up. And the other gods sort of want to accept him as like a friend, but they can't because he keeps messing things up. So they have to like, seal him in a prison. In this case, it's sort of the opposite, where they just kind of know you're gross and they leave him alone in your version. So
yeah, I mean, I want to make it a little more nuanced than that. So it's still like in development, but that's kind of the idea that I have at the moment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, of course I'm oversimplifying with that and making jokes at it, but yes.
Yeah, and then Maven was more like the actual son of Emir, the god of the void, because Emir created him.
Right.
Which is funny, Amir set out to destroy creation, and then he does so by creating things.
Yeah, I guess that is an interesting duality for that. Well, one of my questions there is, did you have any other like gods that sprung up within your creation process that you weren't expecting?
So I don't have any more like major deities like that, but I do have some demigods that have sprung up, and I did talk about one of them last
Hmm.
time briefly, who they were going to encounter in this like crypt that they were exploring or catacombs that they were
Uh-huh.
exploring. And so that demigod was Auric, and he is the Lich demigod. He is basically he is a good aligned Lich who is a servant of Estrella, the goddess of death.
Right. Yes.
And what's funny is, Estrella despises undead, but he found a way to become a Lich without requiring, the sacrifice of life. So she kind of forgave him because he didn't become a lich by taking other people's lives.
Back in my day, good liches were made by someone else forcing someone to go
Baal
through
Norn,
the evil ritual.
yeah, yeah. I definitely expanded the lore of my magic system to accommodate a lot of the lore that I've added. So definitely, there's a lot of things in my setting that don't really fit like 5e lore or like D&D lore in general because like I definitely like to break tropes. I think that Forgotten Realms has been such a staple of D&D for so long.
Yeah, I was gonna say there isn't really D&D lore; it's Forgotten Realms lore at this point.
Yeah, and like people just kind of very adamantly stick to that lore and they seem to get very frustrated if you try to, you know, go get away from that lore. And the best way that I've heard Forgotten Realms described, and one of the reasons that I get away from it, is it's a kitchen sink full of dirty dishes.
Yeah. Hmm.
Because, like, they have every single race you could possibly think of there. And that's one of the, primary reasons that, Aellorah, I wanted there to just be 7 races. And that's all it was to start with.
Right.
And obviously, I added the half elves as part of the story of my campaign. And so, funny thing is, I'm going to be adding a 9th race pretty soon in my campaign that the players might suspect at this point. Um, I'll go into more detail about that once I talk about what's going on in the campaign.
Hmm.
But it was just kind of an idea that occurred to me because I was trying to incorporate more of the characters' backstories into the campaign before I went to the end game.
Hmm.
And um, definitely this chapter, I think, has been the one that I've enjoyed working on the most in a while.
All right. Yeah. Let's get into it. I know you've been active on the setting the stage Discord, talking about different stuff that you've been working on. Um,
Yeah,
yeah. Take it away. You want to talk about like the what's happened in your campaign since last time?
yeah. Well, let me go into that. So, where we last left off, I had talked about how they were heading into some catacombs where they were going to, they were contracted by this wealthy member of what's called the Antiquarians Guild, and he's basically an archaeologist, and he was looking to explore some ruins. And these ruins, where they ended up finding Auric, turned out to be the ruins of an ancient dwarven civilization. And part of the lore is that the dwarves pretty much keep to themselves on Reshik, and
Right.
they don't, they don't allow outsiders. And that was a kind of a shock to the dwarven players who were under the impression, the dwarves lived on Iraq. What's up with that? And they investigated and learned that this ancient dwarven civilization had once occupied like northern Iraq, and at some point, their entire civilization was wiped out by the Void Spawn.
Mm. Yep.
And there were only a handful of survivors who made it back to Reshik. But part of the reason they survived, they only barely survived. And one of the things that happened to them is their souls were not corrupted, but like drained, and their skin became pale and gave them like very pale red eyes. And So that became a new sub-race variant of the dwarves called Ashen Folk, which they're basically like a reskin of Dwergar.
Yeah, I was gonna ask if it was that.
Yeah, and so they went home to Reshik, and they were kind of seen as evil spirits because they looked like ghosts, and so they were exiled to a an an island off of the coast of the mainland, in a region known as the Ashlands. So they live under the mountains in a region known as the Basalt Peaks.
Okay.
And so after they, discovered this, they went on to return back to the city that they've been, in since the beginning of the game. And at some point, I think I mentioned that they had, taken down a cult leader.
Yep.
But some spooky dude had appeared and just killed him out of nowhere with power word kill.
Yep.
So they returned to town, and while the new magistrate was being sworn in and, kind of dedicating a service to the humans who were, all killed during the anti-human movement, there was an undead outbreak in the city where they had risen up from the sewers.
And the anti-human thing was because of a plague or something that people thought was
well,
coming
it
from?
was like it was first racial tension left over from the grave rot plague from centuries ago, because the humans were quarantined before the elves realized that the disease couldn't spread to them, and then they rioted, which killed a bunch of people. So there was obviously racial tension left over, but then the wellspring eruption happened that gave elves and humans the ability to interbreed,
Right.
and suddenly half-elves started to be born, and the elves saw them as like abominations, which started this movement, and they started to hunt them down. And so they took out that cult leader, but then, so the undead outbreak that came from out of the sewers in the city and started attacking people, and led to this massive outbreak that basically shut down the city. Everyone was in hiding, and players were rushing around trying to figure out how to, stop this while they wait for this organization known as the Dawn Star to arrive. They're, undead hunters.
Yep.
And what they ended up doing eventually is they, through working with the Emerald Company, which is this group of goblin hunters that they've been working with since the beginning of the campaign, they had previously acquired a shipment of black powder that the goblins had tried to steal.
And this would be like gunpowder, right?
Yeah, they planted this gunpowder in the center of the city, in the town square, and then they had several of their allies coordinate to lure all of the undead in the city to the center square, and then they just blew them all up.
Oof.
Yeah, and then they learned that this, spooky dude, the necromancer, was trying to obtain the body of a dead titan that was created by Estrella called Tharsis. And his remains were far to the north, so they had to do some travel. And, I started doing some world building specifically for that. And so they made their way north. They found the undead that were trying to unearth its body, and they stopped them. It was a very long chapter. Like, most of my chapters have been around maybe 14 sessions long, but this one I think was close to 30. It lasted almost an entire year.
Wow.
They, on the way back from destroying, or stopping them from obtaining those remains, they met Auric again, who directed them towards some ruins that the undead were seen heading towards. And in those ruins, they found an artifact that was created long ago in some ruins that were occupied by both dwarves and Goliaths, which that was just kind of a random pairing. And, I didn't really have any particular reason for creating that pairing, but the artifact known as the Chronicle of the Dead was this powerful book capable of, maintaining a large number of undead and you could sacrifice life in a large radius to like blot out the sky and do all kinds of crazy stuff.
And aren't the
And
Goliaths the race of the goddess of death in your campaign?
yes,
But
yeah,
she doesn't like undead. She just likes dead people, not undead.
yeah.
Okay.
And so, they brought this artifact back to the city of Mythwell, and went to the Ars Aurum Academy,
Okay. Yep.
where they went and looked for a researcher who could tell them how to destroy this thing. And his answer was, go throw it in the wellspring. He
Yeah.
couldn't think of a better way to do it than that, because artifacts in this setting are, super powerful, and basically the only way you can destroy them is to throw them in a wellspring.
Yep.
And so they went and did that, and when they did, they heard this like voice in their heads that was laughing, that seemed to, he was like calling them fools, as they saw like black smoke swirling out from the chronicle, going throughout the wellspring. And nothing really happened then, but I'm sure that that's been stewing in the back of their head, and I'm actually planting threads for that right now. But basically, that voice in their head was Maven, and so they then went and tracked down Oberyn, the necromancer, and they managed to finish him off, but not before the dwarven artificer character died, because as soon as he walked into the necromancer's chamber, necromancer's just like, yeah, die. And,
Got that power word kill again.
yeah, and, obviously that's not fair to do to a player, especially when they're I think they were like level 12 at that point.
Yeah, and the first time they were like level 5?
Yeah.
Yeah, something like that.
But he went down, and I don't know if he remembered at that point, but he had an artifact that Astix had gifted him after he, took down Haldir, which was basically a one-time usage of Revivify. And it revived him, but not before Astix made him her avatar.
And Astix is the goddess of...
The goddess of the sun.
Okay.
And so Dane, the dwarven artificer character, became her avatar, and that basically gave him a one-time buff that was, pretty powerful to offset the fact that he was a level 20 necromancer. And, so they duked it out, and they managed to stop him, and all was good. And then fast forward to a year later, when they're, just kind of settling into their downtime, and there's a festival, and one night they're out and about, and they come across the rogue player named Summer, who just seems to be staring up at the moon, and her eyes are glowing. And turns out she was having a vision of a woman who seemed to be in some kind of underwater city, claiming to be her grandmother. And so this player hadn't really done any kind of real thorough development into their character. They just kind of had a backstory that they were an orphan who was raised by a human family during the grave rot plague. And, obviously that was a long time ago,
right.
But, she has a respect for humans as a result. And, it wasn't really anything more than that. So I decided to kind of add a little bit on top without making it too intrusive, without, adding too much that would, might make some players go, hey, this isn't what I had in mind for my character.
Yeah.
I just wanted to add some interest. And so basically I said, oh, hey, your long-lost grandmother is trapped in this underwater city and has been there for 13 centuries. And
all right.
So
elven grandmother, that kind of makes sense that long.
Yeah, they made their way to a port city near where this was said to happen, and they ran into the archaeologist they had worked with in the catacombs, and he was looking to investigate these ruins. And so they went down into the ocean after fighting a juvenile kraken, and they found that the city was surrounded by some kind of barrier, and once they went in, they couldn't get out.
Oh.
And they started to explore, and they found um, her grandmother named Calantha, and she, seemed to indicate that this lost city called Serendor, it was some kind of trade city that was out in the Gulf of Iraq. And
Mhm.
one day, just out of nowhere, some kind of shadowy monster, which they would later find out was a void spawn, appeared and sank the island. And she managed to survive because she's a wizard, and she managed to, create like an air pocket in her mentor's tower. And she was telling them that they would have to go around the city and destroy these things called pylons that were controlling the magic that was generating this barrier so that they could get out. And there were all kinds of Sawagan and different sea creatures that they would have to fight along the way. And along the way, she told them this story that she was once the apprentice of this wizard named Valdor, who she said, was this great wizard in the city, one of a kind of collection of wizards who worked together on secretive projects. And she believed that he was the one who had summoned the void spawn that destroyed the city. And so she told them that she had apprenticed for him, but they had a falling out, and she went to study over in Mythwell in the Arsorum Academy, and she made vague references to the fact that she had encountered Adamar, who was the elven illusionist that they had been, kind of at odds with the entire campaign.
Mm-hmm.
And so that kind of put them at edge, but she indicated that he was once an instructor at the academy and that he seemed to, be a good guy at one point. So that kind of threw them for a loop. And she said that when she returned to the city years later, that there was something strange about Valdor, and that he had married some woman who looked like exactly like Calantha. But
And can you remind me who Calantha was in this?
Calantha is the Summer's grandmother.
Okay.
Yeah, so they, went around destroying the pylons until eventually they got separated from Calantha because she had to stay behind for some reason. And they went to one of these next pylons and found that the owner of the laboratory that they found it in wasn't quite dead.
Okay.
And seemed very hostile towards them, but he had kind of a screw loose, and he wasn't making much sense, but he seemed to indicate that Calantha was, the bad guy here. But they didn't take him seriously because, he sounded pretty crazy. And, they tried to deal with him, cue him stopping time and walking away. So this character was known as Silas, and he was a divination wizard, and basically I kind of gave him some chronergy powers, where he had the ability to kind of just glitch time.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I didn't really put too much thought into why he had those powers. I just thought it would be cool.
Yeah, you can just have stuff like that. It's all right.
So yeah, that kind of threw them for a loop, but they continued going around destroying the pylons in spite of what he told them. And then they came to the point where they went down into a trench in the city where they came across the tower of Calantha's supposed mentor, not Valdor, but a halfling woman that she had mentored under. And they found some evidence, some more mentions of Adamar, and found out that he had been contracted to create some of these defenses down here, and through reading um, through reading this halfling mentor's journals, they came to the realization that the fling that so Calantha had mentioned having a fling while she was at the academy, that resulted in the birth of Summer's mother, and she gave her up for adoption because she didn't want to have a kid. And through reading this journal, she discovered that the fling was with Adamar, so she discovered that Adamar was actually her grandfather.
Ah, okay.
And that definitely was something that made her, kind of. She was going on and on about that, and I thought that was a pretty neat little twist. But
that's a classic.
So they can, yeah. So they continued to investigate and eventually get to Valdor's tower, where Silas made one more attempt to attack them to get them to stop what they were doing before they could destroy the final pylon. But they, kind of, he started to have a bit of a moment, a senior moment, and he kind of disappeared while they were trying to think about what to do because they were trapped in this room. They went and destroyed the final pylon, and then they went out into the hallway and Silas wasn't there. And they went to look around some more, and they discovered an illusory wall where there was no sound. It was all dampened. And they investigated behind this wall, and they found none other than a prison cell containing who they would later learn was Valdor.
Oh, okay.
And they found Silas's journal on the ground that went through like a complete recap of everything that he had experienced since the day the island sank and a little bit beforehand. And, through putting together that and talking to Valdor, they discovered that Calantha was responsible for sinking the island. Basically, she was in love with Valdor, and he rejected her. And then, she left the island in a huff. And when she came back, she found out that he married someone who looked identical to her. Or not identical, but close enough to her that she was like, hey, what the hell, bro?
Right.
And so she, as a spurned lover, decided to, summon this void spawn that destroyed the island.
Sounds like a Greek goddess or like a Shakespearean tragedy. Just gotta break everything when you don't get your way.
Almost kind of like Aphrodite, right?
Yeah.
Or I think Aphrodite's the one who's constantly... No, I'm thinking of Hera.
I feel like they all do that, but yeah, Hera does it the most with Zeus.
Yeah, because she's constantly jealous of him, constantly going around and sleeping with random people.
Well, there's this weird aspect of when a Greek goddess falls in love with a male mortal. It's sort of bad news for the mortal because, like, if you reject the goddess, then she'll kill you. And because of the way the Greeks viewed sex as like this dominating act for the male, like if you had sex with them and like they'd also kill you or punish you because you're not allowed to dominate a goddess, like they're above you within the social stratus, right? So it was sort of bad either way.
I probably should go back and read some more Greek mythology because it's a good source of inspiration, and considering that Mir is heavily inspired by Greek architecture and like Spartan culture.
Yeah, I think the big one is Aeneas, who's the son of Aphrodite, like you mentioned, and his father is like both of his legs are broken or something like that, and that they just stay broken forever because he slept with Aphrodite and then she broke his legs.
Oh, jeez.
So when they have to leave Troy, he has to carry his father out, and it's like this sort of symbolic act of caring for your family.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's the famous one. It's Aphrodite, just like you said.
So
yes.
After they discovered this, they freed Valdor, and then they went to track down Calantha, who they had left the archaeologist behind with her since they thought it would be too dangerous to bring him. she wasn't where they left her, and they tracked her to this temple called Dujenishak, which Valdor said would be where she was looking to go because he believed she was looking to obtain an artifact he had created. In that kind of temple where he sealed away the artifact, they found her, kind of with several knives to Ivarian's throat. Ivarian is the archaeologist, and she threatened them. She couldn't get through this seal to the temple because to get through the seal required that you would be blessed by one of the seven sisters, and she knew that they had been because she had revealed to them earlier in the chapter that she had been using divination to scry all throughout the world because she claimed she had been stuck here for 1,300 years. She needed something to do, so she was just kind of basically watching TV by just scrying on random locations, and she had noticed them, so she started watching them, and that's how she learned her connection to Summer. And she claimed that she, knew that they were blessed by the Seven Sisters because she witnessed their battle with Oberyn.
Okay.
And so she tried to force them to go through the door to get the artifact for them, but the Dwarven Artificer is just like, yeah, no. And he just kind of bum rushed her, and she killed the Varian. And they battled her, they won, but then she slowly melts into snow, which I think I remember telling you about how their first encounter with Aellorah went, where and so she was trained by Adamar, so obviously she'd pull the same tricks, and they scrambled around, tried to revive Ivarian, but realized that they didn't have the necessary components, and so Valdor comes out of nowhere. And he, places his hand on Ivarian, and suddenly you see blood coming out of Valdor and going into Ivarian, and Ivarian gets up. And this was my way of introducing one of my custom classes that I've talked about in your Discord called the Blood Marker.
Uh-huh.
And so he is a Blood Marker, which is basically, it's very similar to like Critical Role's Blood Hunter, but it's more of a caster class rather than a melee class, because I don't really know that much about Blood Hunter. I haven't really researched it, but I kind of wanted to combine the trying to remember the subclass of Warlock. It's Hexblade.
Uh-huh.
So I kind of wanted to combine their hexes with kind of blood magic, and I gave them what are called transfusions, which are similar to kind of like the invocations of the Warlock class.
Uh-huh.
So, I still haven't quite finished that class, but of course it was, good idea of me to try to come up with 2 more before I finish that one.
Right.
So they managed to, kill her, and then they opened the seal into the temple to go find the artifact, and they find this elixir, which I don't remember if they ever actually discovered its full effects, but they decided to toss it on the ground and destroy it. And so basically that elixir would give you eternal life and among a bunch of other resistances, but it would make it so that you can't take any hostile action.
Okay.
So I got the inspiration from Dawn Shards from Brandon Sanderson's Cosmere.
That's I think that's a Chinese like sort of trope as well, like, a warrior that gives up their life of like violence to go be a Buddhist monk or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And then sometimes there's like an item that sort of signifies that they've given up fighting so that people will leave them alone. They come over and they're like, hey, I want to fight you because you're the best. Oh, wait, no, you have the little token, so I know that you've given it up, so I'll leave you
alone. But yeah, they managed to destroy that, and then they went back. They had to go and find the thing that was actually generating the barrier, which turned out to be in Calantha's little cave that they met her in.
Mhm.
and they went back to the surface, and she was attacking the port town that they had come from, and they managed to finish her off. After it was a pretty close battle. I remember that that was a very long battle, and I think that the session went from like 5 o'clock to midnight.
Oh, jeez.
Yeah, so that was a hell of a battle. And so after that, there was more downtime, and now we get to where we are now, or almost, where so the dwarven player is an artificer, and his backstory was basically that roughly 10 years ago, he was an artificer at the Runesmith College in Reshik,
Mhm.
and he had basically canonically invented the Steel Defender, the subclass option for Battlesmith.
Uh-huh.
And he said that his cousin had stolen the designs and presented them as his own. And the the dwarven artificer character, he lost his reputation for it. So he left Reshik to go learn more about magic so that he could learn how his cousin, ripped off his designs, and so he could go back to Reshik someday and recover his reputation.
Okay.
And so after he had been seeing little hints to his cousin's presence throughout Iraq, that was confusing him. He at one point had seen his cousin trying to sell knockoffs of his Steel Defender in the town that they were in, and he at the time had managed to embarrass him and make him look like a joke. But then he started to see more of these enhanced versions that were just randomly being bought by magistrates throughout Iraq and put to use as like labor and as guards. And so he was very confused by that, and because supposedly Reshik is never, obviously they're very, they keep their technology to themselves. I mean, they closed off their entire continent to foreigners because of it.
Right.
And so he wanted to know more about this, and by chance he ran into another dwarf who was looking for him, who was looking to investigate the same thing, and he sought him out because he had heard the rumors about the stolen designs, and so they went to Reshik, and obviously he's the only dwarf player in the group, so you would think, how are they going to get out of this trade city, the one city where they're allowed to be? And my solution to that was I created this class called the Filamentor, which I don't think I've mentioned in the Discord yet, but
Nope.
the basics behind that class are that they have the ability to extract this like thread out of a person called filament,
Okay.
and filament it gives you the ability to it's like a tie to the person's identity. And I got this idea from an anime called The Rising of the Shield Hero.
Okay.
Um,
Yep.
I
It's a popular one.
basically it's like pulling a thread out of the person, and then that thread has a direct tie to that person's identity, and you can make all kinds of enchantments by including that thread as part of the enchantment process.
So it's kind of like
And I was
the true naming thing where you're like using kind of a piece of their soul, sort of.
kind of, yeah. And then I started to expand on that idea. I was like, so what if I made it so that you could do all kinds of rituals where as long as you have someone's filament, you can essentially target them from any distance. You can, target them with any kind of spell as long as you have their filament. So I came up with a class feature called the Lash, which is like a whip that is made of the caster's own filament,
Oh.
where they kind of lash onto a target and basically connect themselves to the target's filament. And that gives them the ability to, instead of like slinging spells and making attack rolls, instead you can directly target them so that they have to make saves rather than you making attacks.
Okay.
And So I'm still working on that, but my solution to the players, not all being dwarves, I decided, well, this dwarven dissident that they met named Gardane, which it's funny because the dwarven player's name is Dane, and that totally wasn't, intentional. I use a random name generator, and that one came up. I thought it was funny.
Eh, they're dwarves. They can have like naming conventions to their names, right?
It's not the first time I've done that because the dwarven artificer's name is Dane Brawnanvil, and so at one point I introduced a dwarven smith NPC called Braun Dane Anvil.
Oh boy.
Yeah, he didn't think it was very funny.
Well, honestly, there are a bunch of names in the real world that are like that. Like, there's a bunch of male names in Greek that end with like this er sound, right?
Yeah.
Um, and the eus ending name for Greeks is like just the sort of that's how names end, right? And it's eus for males and ea for women, and that's Greek and Latin both work that way.
Mm-hmm. So my solution was I had them contact this NPC called Ferric, who's a Filamentor, and what he did was they had him extract filament from a few different dwarves who were part of the dissident faction to use as disguises, and then he inserted the filament he took from them into the players, and then cast what's called a glamour on them, which is like an illusion, but it doesn't work like traditional illusion magic. It literally transforms them into the target by overriding their identity.
Okay.
And so they basically now look like the dwarves, but there's a limit to the magic where even though the dwarven technology can't detect it as a traditional illusion, if they are damaged by magical energy, it can disrupt the glamour. So I have like this pool of points that will deplete every time they take damage from a magical source. And once it's depleted, then their glamour goes away and they'll be revealed.
That sounds pretty complicated. Does that feel worth it to you as a mechanic?
I mean, I think it's fun.
Okay.
I'm sure that it can go wrong, but I just thought that it would provide some tension, and like I thought it was an easier way of getting around the problem of, how do I get them into the mainland?
Yeah. I was just curious if you felt like it was worth it. So I guess the answer is yes.
Yeah. So they traveled to the dwarven capital where they are now, and they, investigated the Forgeborn, as they're called, which are what they're calling the knockoff steel defenders.
Mm-hmm.
And they learned a lot about how rune tech, which is the dwarven technology, how that works. And now they were told by the dwarven dissidents that they were supposed to meet with a whistleblower from the royal court who was going to give them some information they needed to, investigate this properly. But when they went to the meeting, he wasn't there, and they got word that he was betrayed, and he was now in the dwarven supermax prison called the Vault.
Okay.
And so now that's where they are now. They just broke into the Vault. What they did was they went to a sealed off mine shaft nearby that's connected to a new wing of the prison that's still under construction. And they snuck in there invisibly. What they're going to find out tomorrow during our next session is that the dwarven rune tech, all of the guards carry visors and they can see invisibility. So we'll see how that goes.
It's kind of like night vision goggles.
Hopefully they won't, rely too much on the invisibility, thinking that they're safe.
And the rune tech stuff is like how the dwarves have all this like basically modern technology almost made with magic.
Well, not quite modern. It's more like steampunk almost.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah, I guess that's what I should have said.
It's kind of like what maybe the 18th century thought modern technology would look like.
Right. Yeah.
So like obviously they have the Forgeborn, which are automatons, and then I'm still thinking about all kinds of different technology to add. And so rune tech, I would have to first talk about flow.
Yeah, sure.
So flow is what I call the magical energy that basically catalyzes spell casting,
Okay.
and it's basically kind of like what in Forgotten Realms what the weave is. So flow is produced by the well springs. It's an invisible energy you can't see unless you're using like the detect magic spell, that basically suffuses the atmosphere. And when it has two states, static and charged, where static is just the ambient flow that you have in the atmosphere that is ready to be used to power spells. And when you cast a spell, you draw in that flow or do what's called directing the flow, and you basically charge the flow and you give it an enchantment, and that's what produces the magical effect. And so by doing this, you can, when you charge this flow, when you look through a spell like Detect Magic, the way that I explain it is, charged, you can see charged flow and ambient flow, and the charged flow, by looking at it, you can see what school of magic it is because it's charged with a particular, signature.
Mm-hmm.
So flow is, just kind of a way to explain where that magic energy comes from. And I've used a few different like narrative devices to explain how things like anti-magic field works, where you're creating a field that repels flow. And there are certain materials, like there's one that I mentioned in the last episode that I don't think that I named, but it's a material that had the ability to absorb the flow.
Yep.
Called Eskite.
Yep. I think I remember you mentioning that one.
Yeah, I don't think that I had given it a name at that point, but it's called Eskite. And then there's also another material called Shade Steel that has the ability to completely block flow, almost like lead blocks radiation.
Mm-hmm.
So,
well, lead blocks magic in D&D, like the basic rules.
Yeah. But yeah, I've been having a lot of fun creating different metals and giving them different magical properties. But so getting back to flow, I said that the reason that spells work like Vancian magic, where you have spell slots and there's a certain amount of spells you can cast per day, is because the Seven Sisters, to prevent abuse of magic, put what's called a flow lock on mortals so that they can only direct a certain amount of flow per day before it's like a physical, like a gate that shuts so that you can't, use anymore. And, I've been trying to come up with different narrative ways to describe, all the mechanics of magic in D&D. But so getting back to the well springs, so they produce this flow, and I've been trying for a long time to figure out, like, how did the wellspring eruptions get triggered? So I came up with the concept of a flow cascade, where, so the Sorcerer's Cabal has been like they're a faction of wizards that kind of act as like the policing force and the usage of magic. And they believe that by casting higher level spells and by charging more and more flow, you create like an unstable effect that can trigger an eruption. Okay. And they're right. Like they don't have all the details correct, but basically what happens is if you cast repeated high level spells in an area, you charge that flow, and the more charged it is, if you have too much highly charged flow in one area, it creates like a chain reaction that spreads to all the flow in the area. And this can create what's called a flow cascade, which basically that's just a chain reaction. And if it goes on long enough, it can reach the well springs, and that's what triggers the eruption.
Okay, so let's take a step back for a second. So you said initially that the flow acts as a catalyst for magical spells.
Yeah.
So catalyst in a chemistry sense is something that's involved within a chemical reaction but does not change during the process of it.
All right, so maybe it's not the most accurate word to use to describe it, but
Well, I mean,
basically,
maybe it's still there. Like it's okay, but part of where I'm going with this is that usually within a magical system there is something that is consumed in order to cast the spell, and the obvious thing is usually spell components, or the magic users like own personal energy, and that's why they're sort of restricted, is that they run out of energy.
Mm-hmm.
Mana points in Magic, like in RPG video games, like MP for Final Fantasy is the idea. We got Vancian casting. There were power points for Scions.
So the flow is consumed by the process, but once you charge it, basically it stays charged until the enchantment ends, and then it kind of dissipates.
Okay. So what within your system and your conception of it, what is the energy or item essence that is charging the flow?
So basically, when you create an enchantment, when a spellcaster creates that enchantment, they are energizing the flow, using the spellcasting process. It's not necessarily the spellcaster themselves, but they're communicating with the aura, the force of magic that controls magic. And the aura energizes that flow with the enchantment that they described. So the aura acts like an interpreter, like a programming language. The aurum, which is the language of magic, you use that to describe a spell, and it's like a set of instructions, and then the aura takes those instructions and puts it out into the world by energizing that flow.
Okay, so the flow comes out of the wellsprings, is all chock full of magical energy to do something. A spellcaster comes along and says, do this, basically, with the spell.
Yeah.
And that takes the flow, does that, and then the flow still has some, like, leftover bits of that. And if there are too many leftover bits, then they'll all go together and cause a flow cascade, and if there's enough leftover bits in the same area, that goes from just being a flow cascade to a wellspring eruption.
Yeah. So basically, once the cascade reaches the wellspring erupts.
Okay. All right. I think I get it from there.
Yeah, and so there's differing amounts of flow throughout the world, because, like, in places like Iraq, you have like a normal amount of flow because magic is used at a fairly normal rate there. And then in Mir, where in most of Mir, magic is illegal and punishable by death, obviously there's less magic usage there, so it has a higher degree of flow. And then in Reshik, that's the other extreme, their rune tech, one of the things they've done is they've created devices that have the ability to gather the static flow from the atmosphere and condense it, and they've created basically magic batteries called flow cells.
Oh, okay.
And they store that energy to be used in their rune tech. And so they've gotten to the point where they've gathered pretty much all the static flow in Reshik. So there is, in many parts of Reshik, there's like no flow left. Like the wellsprings generate it, but it's all being collected by the flow generators, as they're called.
Got an energy crisis over there.
Yeah. It's not that they're running out. It's that they have gotten to the point where they're gathering it as fast as it's being produced.
Uh-huh.
So, they store all that energy and then they repurpose it by using it in their rune tech. And so that's the explanation for why there's like different levels of flow. And those differing levels of flow, like obviously in a place like Reshik, if you run into a pocket where there's no flow, you can't cast spells.
I was gonna ask you about that. There was a plane in Forgotten Realms, I think the Outlands was the one where magic didn't work.
I would have to look that up, because Forgotten Realms, like, there's so much lore to it that, I can't remember it all.
Yeah, no, this one was kind of interesting. Like the Outlands, because magic didn't work, and it was a radial plane, so there was like a center tower where magic
Hmm.
didn't work at all. And then as you got further away from the tower, magic worked a bit better until like, a little bit away, like ninth level spells will work, a little bit further away, eighth level until you get to the edge.
That kind of sounds like Elantris, Brendan Sanderson's book, Elantris.
I think it was inspired by that. Um,
Yeah, because that sounds exactly like the Elantrians, where their magic only works because of the geography of the area or directly around the region known as Aellorah.
I haven't read his books, but I think it's the other way where like you had to be further away for it to work. So it's more like
Oh, all right.
Kryptonians, I guess, would be an example.
Ah, yeah, that makes sense.
Um, but the interesting part of that is at the tower, uh, even God's magic doesn't work. So
Oh,
the tower was like sort of a neutral location for the gods to come together and talk to each other because they couldn't really fight.
yeah.
So that was a interesting take on it. And I guess I was curious if there was something like that you would use in your world where the magic dead zones end up being sort of neutral ground where you can have those kinds of conversations between
Hmm.
spellcasters that hate each other.
Yeah, and then there's the other extreme, which is in places like Mir where there's so much static flow. Um, so the more flow that there is, like uh, condensed into one small area, the more unstable it becomes. So basically, in Mir, there are regions where it's so concentrated that any spells over like a certain level, like even a wizard is going to cause a wellspring surge, which is basically like a wild magic surge.
Hmm.
And so I wanted to, give it an element of instability.
Right, I remember us talking about that last time where I think I asked you if you had like different surge tables for different well
Yeah,
springs.
I have a couple of different tables now, but it's just two D100 tables. I would like to create like different tables for each wellspring. So like depending on which one you're closest to, that determines which one you roll on.
You could just have it be like, like 1 through 70 are kind of standardized, and then the last 30 percentile pips are all more unique to each. I mean, you don't need a whole unique thing for each one, right?
Mhm. No, I mean not like a D100. I was thinking more like a D20 table for each of them. But
Yeah, same thing. It's 1 to 14 instead of 170, but yeah.
mm. But yeah, so that's the basics of how flow works, and I'm still trying to add more nuances to it. So the way rune tech works on Reshik is, like I said, they condense all that flow into these flow cells,
Hmm.
and then so they have flow. They created what's called flow condensers first, and then from that they created flow generators. So flow condensers just condensed it into a small compact form, but they couldn't really do anything with it. But then they created the flow generators, which store that energy into the flow cells, because the flow cells were invented afterwards.
Okay.
Um, and then they invented what's called the flow diffuser. And the flow diffuser is basically like a heat sink for flow. And what that allowed them to do, why this one invention made them so powerful, is because I talked about the flow lock, where you can only use a certain amount of flow per day, and
Hmm.
so that applies to enchanted items too. So like you have items that, like a wand of fireballs only has 7 charges per day, and then you have to wait till the next dawn. But if you used all those charges, it can disintegrate. If
Right.
you like, it's almost like you're forcing too much power through it, so it just disintegrates from the stress, and you have to wait for it to cool down almost. So that developed into the idea, well, what if they developed a device that could basically cool it down faster, like a heat sink?
Okay.
So
Yeah.
now they have this device that modifies an enchanted item that basically increases the amount of power that you can put through it before, without it burning out. And so that pushed them up to a different power level, because now they have a wand of fireballs that cools down so quickly that as long as they have power, they can just keep using it. And they modified the magic items to use these flow cells with this stored power, so that they can just keep casting it. And I think that I said that I would put a limit on it of like you could have 15 charges per hour.
Wow.
And obviously, like, this isn't meant for the players to use because that would be ridiculous.
Yeah.
But it was my explanation of how the dwarves became so powerful, and I've expanded that out into so many different things. Obviously they have a stupid amount of power available now, and so they have inventions like the Flow Lancer, which is like basically an AA gun that they can use to like instantly destroy the void spawn.
Ah, okay. That's actually pretty cool.
Because it's basically like an AA gun that shoots radiant damage, which is the one thing that they're completely susceptible to.
Perfect.
And so they just load up a flow cell. It consumes the entire flow cell in one shot. And then, it's like 50 spell slots worth. So a flow cell can store like 50 spell slots worth of flow. And then it's like burning through all that energy at once.
Okay. This is kind of feeling like a uniquely 5th edition type of magic, because the idea of wands kind of disintegrating after 7 uses per day is very much a 5th edition thing. Like before that, it was either you had daily uses and after that you just couldn't use it, or you had like wands had 50 uses, period, and then they just disintegrated.
Even though I want this setting to be applicable to more than just 5th edition, obviously I created it with 5th edition in mind, and so I'm trying to like reflavor some of the 5th edition mechanics and explain them differently so that I can imagine new ways to use them.
Oh, it's neat. Like I think it's cool to take inspiration from the mechanics that way to design, like, come up with a reason why they work that way within the universe, right?
Yeah.
Like the characters have to be aware of them working that way, or else it doesn't make sense, right?
Yeah, it's definitely still a work in progress, and I'm trying to think of some ways to make it more interesting. But yeah, so one other thing that I've been working on a lot are materials and metals. Mm-hmm. And I already mentioned Eskite and Shade Steel, where Eskite has the ability to absorb flow. And the thing is, when it absorbs that flow, it basically consumes it, and the metal itself grows. So, like, you can grow this metal. But that metal is the reason that Mir, the Rathmore Empire, why their military is so strong, because anyone who's using magic, I got a shield that can absorb it. And, like, it has its limits. If you overload it, it can explode.
Oh, well.
Yeah, and then there's Shade Steel, which acts, similarly to lead, but I also gave it some other properties. Like, obviously, it can't be enchanted, but it has, like, an expanded critical range if you make a weapon from it, and it's just, like, a very hard metal. Mm-hmm. There's Storm Silver, which is actually one of the metals that is the reason that they can make flow cells, because they combine. So Storm Silver has the ability to absorb an electrical charge, and they combined it with some kind of crystal that, instead of storing an electrical charge, it stores a flow charge. And so that's how the flow cells work. There's Petrosteel, which has the ability to absorb shock, like vibrations. So you make it, which is funny because Petrosteel, it's a metal, but it looks like granite almost. Uh-huh. And if you were to make boots out of it, they would look ridiculous, but they would absorb shock, so it would make no noise. And it would also be like resistant to thunder, but because it absorbs shock, it's incredibly hard to mine it.
Yeah.
Then there's some of the more exotic metals that I really had to put my mind to, like Zegramite, which Zegramite is a metal that, if it's in contact with flow, it exists on all planes.
like the overlapping planes, like Shadow,
Yeah,
Feywild,
so like it exists on the
Ethereal.
material plane, the ethereal plane, all planes. And the one of the interesting ways that that can be used is like if you mix like powdered zeegramite into like stonework, then if someone tries to teleport into an area, then teleportation, I ruled, is like traveling through another plane temporarily, almost like Nightcrawler. He, teleports and he appears in like hell and then transports himself.
I mean, that's the base ruling is that the teleportation within D&D is traveling through the astral plane very quickly.
Oh, all right.
So you're
Yeah,
on brand.
so since Seegermite exists on the astral plane, then when someone tries to teleport, they try to go through this wall, for example, but they can't because they run right into the Seegermite and they bounce right off of it.
Mm-hmm. Yep, that's
And
yep, that's how it works for other stuff like that within some D&D adventures. I think they had stuff like that blocked travel. So you also couldn't summon creatures within that room either because you couldn't pull them in.
yeah, I ruled that if you like make a weapon out of it, it's more effective against summoned creatures or creatures from other planes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then there's a crystal called Etronite, which is a more recent invention where when you tap certain metals against it, certain enchanted metals, like the metals I've been talking about, each metal has a different effect. Each metal is associated with a different school of magic. And for example, if you tap Shade Steel against it, Shade Steel is associated with a particular school of magic, and it will produce a tone that will disrupt any charged flow associated with that school of magic. So basically, it produces a tone that will dispel magic of a certain school.
That's cool.
Yeah.
So I guess I have a question about all this creation stuff you've been doing with like the blood marker, the filamenter, and all these different metals and stones and stuff. Do you feel like the creation aspect that you're doing is more like, for yourself to have fun, or your players engaging with it a whole bunch?
It's a bit of both, and also, I mean, I'm working on a campaign setting guide that I want to publish someday.
Yeah, I
So
think that's pretty cool.
definitely, those are all things that I want to include in the guide, and that's definitely like heavily underway. I've been a little sluggish lately, but I think the current status of the document, I think I'm up to like 50,000 words.
Mm-hmm. It's like 100 pages.
Yeah. So I'm imagining it's probably going to come up to it's going to be a hefty book, probably like 400 something pages.
Wow, you got a lot more to go then.
Yeah. It's going to take a while, but I am going to finish it.
Well, that's pretty cool.
Anyway, yeah. So one thing I wanted to mention is that I have some custom race variants now where I wanted to make them more my own and also avoid legal issues with using specific names of races. So now I have different names for some of the races, and I've not only changed the details of like their culture, but I'm also creating new racial traits.
Mm-hmm.
And so, for example, I have instead of Asimar, now I have Luminari. And then instead of Tabaxi, they're called Linoshi.
Okay.
The halflings are called Vesperkin.
Okay.
The Goliaths are called Etenor. The halflings are called Silvereth. And then the reveal, the ninth race that I was talking about earlier, it's actually going to be the Forgeborn, which are the automatons that they're trying to stop production of at the moment. So there's going to be an event later on in the chapter that is basically going to awaken the Forgeborn, like almost like the Awaken spell.
They're all gonna wake up and want their bottles and whatever else.
Yeah, there's going to be some like Who am I? What am I? I'm sure gonna have some fun with that.
Do they just like roll stats when they wake up? So they end up being sort of, some of them are really dumb and some of them are geniuses.
Probably, yeah. So basically, they're like my variant of the Warforged.
Yep.
And so each of them is going to have unique racial traits. And so the way that works is obviously each of the races is associated with a particular goddess that created them. And when they created them, they each were infused with, or they inherited three particular domains from the goddess's portfolio.
Mm-hmm.
And so, like, each of them gets a particular domain. Like the Vesperkin, the halflings, they get the domains of darkness from Umos, and also a couple of others. They each race gets three of those domains, and so they each express a racial trait associated with those domains. So for the Vesperkin, I think it's the darkness domain that gives them an enhanced dark vision almost.
Okay.
So instead of getting the standard dark vision 60 feet that practically every race has, I wanted to make it a little more interesting. Since they are children of darkness, essentially, they should be able to see in the darkness better than other races. And so rather than just give them an extended range, I said they essentially get not a form of blind sight, but they get almost infrared vision or heat vision within 30 feet.
Uh-huh.
So if you're within 30 feet of them, they can see your heat signature. So even if you're in total darkness or even magical darkness, they can see your heat.
Okay. And would that work against invisible people too?
Yes.
Okay. That's cool.
Yeah, so that's going to be. I'm trying to think of racial traits that express for each of these divine domains, and it is really challenging because I'm trying not to make them overpowered, but I also kind of want to make them overpowered.
Well, that one seems funny because you would be tricked by like an undead creature, right?
Yeah,
Or a
probably.
golem because they don't have heat.
Yeah, it's something that the DM would have to roll.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, a lot of 5th edition stuff doesn't get that granular for how it works.
Yeah, and then one that some of my players thought was overpowered, but I think that they might not have understood what I was saying, is that the dwarves get basically like a magic sense ability where they just passively can detect magic, but not like the detect magic spell. They can't see it, they can smell it. And this was based off of a joke earlier in the campaign where every time that Dane, the dwarven artificer player, was not present at the table, the other players would take control of his character, and they basically just made this joke that he was their resident. He had the identify spell and the detect magic spell, so they'd point him in a direction, say Dane, identify, and I would make the joke that he would basically like get on all fours and start sniffing around and like point towards the magic like a pointer dog.
Well, I mean, that was kind of how elves worked in 3rd edition, where they just, if they walked by like a secret door, they got to roll to detect it.
Mm. But it's like a smell, and they can smell it. They can't tell they can tell the distance, and they can tell that it's there, but they can't tell like the school of magic. They can't tell the exact direction. They can only tell the distance, and they can detect that it's there.
Yeah.
So it's not that overpowered, I don't think.
Yeah, I don't like
But
that's
it's
weaker than a
interesting.
cantrip. That seems fine.
Yeah.
I was thinking that what you would do for race variants would be something like each of the 7 races gets like 7 variants for having like some sort of greater affinity for each of the different goddesses,
Mm-hmm.
and maybe like a secret 8th one for Ymir. But
Seven racial traits might be a bit too much.
yeah.
I'm already having trouble coming up with three.
Yeah, and you could also do it as like a background, and then that kind of catches the same vibe.
Yeah.
Then you don't have to come with 7 for each. It's just 7 total.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so so the custom race variants, that's something I've been working on a lot lately. And then I remember I mentioned in the last episode that I was thinking about working on my own app to make my own calendar. And I don't know
Right.
why I thought that was a good idea. I just ended up using fantasycalendar.com.
But you had some interesting ideas for it. But yeah, that there are a decent number of apps that already can function for that,
Mhm.
from what I've heard.
Yeah, I've had fun populating it with a lot of different events,
Oh, cool.
like coming up with holidays and, plotting events from the campaign on it so I can keep track of how long it's been since a certain event.
Yeah, that was something that I always had trouble with, was actually having like sort of festivals as part of my campaign. Like I
Yeah.
had celebrations, but I never had one that just like happens just kind of in the background. It's always like, oh, there's a wedding coming up or
hmm
whatever, but it was never like there's the festival of Dionysus, so everyone needs to go get some wine. And I never did stuff like that. I feel like it was something I
Yeah, I've
missed.
come up with some pretty wacky holidays. But I did end up working on a tool, though, called Commerce Cartographer,
Hmm.
which is kind of a wacky name, but I wanted something a little more robust than the World Anvil interactive map
Hmm.
because one thing that I find frustrating is going back and forth between my notes on my little phone and OneNote, trying to find information on each individual shop that the players visit and what that shop might have. So I created a interactable map where you can place markers for each city, and then on that city you can add um, metadata about the city, like what's the population, how big is it, that kind of thing. And then you can add shops to a list. And for each shop, you can add an inventory and populate it if you want, and like metadata about the shop.
Okay.
And one idea that I had, the commerce part of the name, was that I figured like a stretch goal could be like I could add like trade routes between the cities so that you could like you could shuffle around the inventory and generate new inventory.
All right.
I haven't worked on that in a while because my life has gotten a little crazy and I haven't had the time. So I mean, it has some basic functionality right now, but it's definitely got a ways to go if I ever want it to be like a fully fledged, you know, tool.
It's funny that the Mountain Blade 2 game, they spent a ton of time developing something like that for the game, where
Yeah.
resources are produced in the villages, they're brought to the towns where they're then like either consumed or, processed into other stuff. So like the village will produce wool from sheep and mutton, and they'll
Mhm.
bring that to the town, and the mutton will get consumed, and the wool will get uh, turned into cloth, and then the cloth gets turned into um, clothing, and
Mhm.
all of that's happening within the game. And you can like buy these things. So you can buy wool. You can buy the mutton and have your little troops eat it. You can buy the wool and then trade it somewhere else. You can buy the clothing and then trade it somewhere else. But there's also caravans going around that are doing all this trading as well, that are basically trying to, the caravans want to make a profit, and they're also trying to distribute the resources kind of evenly between the different cities, because each of the cities kind of wants the things they don't have, right?
Yeah.
And it's this whole process that's happening just within the AI, moving the resources around, that they
Yeah.
spent a ton of time developing. It sounds very similar to this idea of like you having the shops being connected and then exchanging inventory.
Yeah. It would definitely be like a bare bones thing because I don't want to spend too much time on that. I already have enough projects I haven't completed.
Yeah, yes. I personally think that the Mountain Blade 2 people spent too much time developing that. Like it's
I have Mountain Blade 2, but I haven't gotten to play it yet. I've played Warband and I really liked that one, but I still haven't gotten around to 2 because I have too many games in my backlist, man. I still
yeah,
haven't finished Baldur's Gate 3. I'm in Act 3 and I still need to finish it, but
uh-huh.
and yeah, I instead of finishing Baldur's Gate 3, I've just been playing Minecraft again. Yeah, I still get to save the stupid Gondians.
Yes. Well, I gotta say for Mountain Blade 2, it's a fun game, it's great, but like it's very much like the same game as Warband. It's just like a slight improvement, you know.
Yeah,
And I like it. I think it was fun, but
I'll definitely give it a try at some
yeah,
point.
I think it would be better to start it now. Like I started it when it was first had the early access release, and it was
Yeah, it started before they updated enough to the point where they break it.
yeah. They like there were some types of sieges that just didn't work, and so you kind of just like, okay, well that town has that type of siege, so I can't take it over.
Hmm.
Um, and they've since fixed that. I would say I think they officially released it a while ago. Um, which I think was more they ran out of money to keep developing it. It didn't really feel like they were done yet, but
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I will slowly get to each of the games on my list. Just I put too much on my plate.
yeah.
My week is constantly full of things to do, and my condo is a mess because I never have time to clean it. So,
hmm Yep. Life as an adult, man.
mm. but yeah, just a couple more things about the world that
Yeah.
I wanted to mention. I took the time to formalize some of the governments in
hmm
the world, and I established like all of the governments that are like major players in the world. On Mir, we obviously have the Rathmore Empire that I've mentioned before, which is like that Spartan culture that's mostly human, and they have a really powerful military, but they're just kind of very like conservative types, and they're very cruel to the elves that live in their society. Also on Mir is what I call the Commonwealth, which is the Vesperkin or Halfling society, where they kind of have a free democracy where kind of everyone weighs in on changes they want made, and then they have a council called the Speakers that gets together every year to vote on things that their constituents want done, and then they implement them. And so it's a very progressive society, but they're not really very advanced. The Vesperkin are very like lackadaisical people, and they are more community focused because that's part of their one of their divine domains is community. Yeah, so the divine domains, for each race, they don't just influence the racial traits; they also influence like what gives each race satisfaction in life. And like the dwarves have the divine domains of magic. So obviously they get great satisfaction from learning about magic.
hmm
And then the divine domains associated with those races also determine kind of the theme of the afterlife that they go to.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so I still haven't delved that much into the afterlife because it doesn't really seem like something that needs to come up. It can be kind of vague, but if I ever like expand the religions more, I think I'm going to have to come up with like what each religion thinks happens in the afterlife.
Yeah, I think it's sort of a classic adventure, like something goes into the afterlife and you have to like go there to bring it back out.
Yeah. Then in Iraq, we have the entire continent is just one big democracy called, and I'm still not sure if I totally like this name, but it's called the Synodical Republic. Synod, like
Okay.
Synod.
Okay. So like a religious organization. Okay.
Yeah, kind of. And so like there's several different major regions, and each region has a couple different magistrates that, kind of have jurisdiction over the surrounding settlements, but they all kind of fall under a common law.
Okay. I mean, that sounds like any other government, really.
Yeah, then on Reshik, there's the Imperium Arcanum, which is the monarchy that Reshik falls under.
hmm
They have what are called chamberlains.
hmm
So they have chamberlains in each settlement that kind of, do similar to what they do in the Commonwealth, where they, hear the opinions of the masses and bring it to the king, who works with the Grand Chamberlain to decide what is enacted. And Reshik also has obviously the Ashen folk who are in the offland, who they're starting to rejoin the mainland ever since that discovery was made at the catacombs of Blackfrost. But they have their own monarchy called, I think it's the Hardak dynasty.
Mm-hmm.
And then on Gother is the continent I haven't really spent much time on at all. I still haven't really gone into any detail there. Like, I think I told you about the Fell orcs, which are just, orcs on steroids. But so the government they have there is the Spellscar Protectorate, which is they have this military crusade called the Spellscar Crusade.
Yep.
It's a mouthful.
Mm-hmm.
That they were formed to try to deal with those fell orcs that came from the region called the Spellscar, that came from the Wellspring anomaly.
Yep.
And so basically, it's like a military government or like a martial law type thing.
One of the things that I have found more interesting when reading campaign settings isn't necessarily the government, but like sort of factions that exist under the government, kind of like not like political parties, but like, sort of like the Merchants Guild within a particular government region might be extremely powerful. So they're sort of like, there's the king, but the Merchants Guild is kind of also in control, and the king has to like respect them. But do you have anything kind of like that going on?
Not yet. I haven't really gone into that much detail. I'm still trying to. I obviously, you pointed out last time that I did a very top-down type of world building,
mm-hmm.
and I started with the Pantheon and worked my way down, and that's still kind of where I am. I don't know, I guess it's because working top down, it requires less detail to radiate downwards, whereas if you start bottom up, you have to come up with like all the culture and all the different details for one particular area, and then it just takes forever to build that world.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas now I have an entire world, like some areas might be a little vague, but it's an entire world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And, I can build up areas as needed.
Yeah, I think the as needed thing is pretty important for like actually playing within a world,
Yeah, it's what works for me and my ADHD.
Yeah. Well, and like you said, you're spending so much time like just making the campaign that you haven't been able to invest as much in the campaign world because we're still playing a game here. Come on, Darin.
Yeah. I mean, you say that to me, it really just feels like a novel. No, I definitely do treat the world building almost like it's a novel, but because I want to give it, that amount of detail. I want it to really have some oomph when I describe things. I want to be able to drop all these terms on my players that they're going to be like, what's that mean? What does that mean? And then, I get a chance to delve into the lore. And, I definitely really appreciate when the players take the time to delve into the lore, because they do occasionally, but a lot of the times they're just like, can we kill something?
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, that's part of what World Anvil was designed for. It's not just for RPGs. It's also for fantasy authors to sort of take their notes and everything all organized for themselves.
Yeah, and I've started. I've done a lot better of a job doing the recaps for my sessions, because earlier on in the campaign, I really just wrote down very, very bare bones notes to remind myself of major things that happened, and even then, I forgot a lot of things.
Mm-hmm.
But now I write so much detail that like each session is practically a news article. And I have like a master list on World Anvil that lists out every session, and you can click that session and go read about it. So the players have like every detail they need to remember things, because I know that they're going to forget a lot, because I do a lot of info dumping.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that's been fun to write. So like every Saturday night after my session, it takes like an hour to write down the recap.
Big recap.
So I put a lot of work into this game.
Ah, man, I used to write recaps that had like dialogue in them, and it was a lot of work.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I even sometimes include pictures, the concept art that I generate with Midjourney.
Yep. I did pictures too.
Yeah, I have a whole channel on my Discord server where I post all of the concept art that I've generated.
Yeah, cool. So you had a few more things on your list of stuff to hit here.
Yeah, so um, I don't really feel like I need to talk about Sarah Lore or the timeline because the timeline, there isn't really much I can say there. Just that, like, I actually created, the different ages of the world.
Hmm.
So I created, I solidified like the the different ages that led up to where they are now. So you had the Sundering period, which is when the Seven Sisters were first experimenting with life, and they created the Titans. And then you had the Age of the Founders when the dwarves were first born into the world. And then they had like 4,000 years to themselves, or 3,000 years to themselves before the elves showed up and ruined everything, which was the Age of Creation when they started creating all the other races. Then there was the Age of Darkness when the Void Spawn started showing up and ruining everything, and then they created the Aasimar or the Luminari to deal with that. Um, then after that came the upheaval, which is when a lot of things around the world started to change, and there was a lot of it was almost like a Renaissance period.
Hmm.
Then there was the Reckoning, where just basically a whole lot of bad shit started happening all at once around the world. A lot of wellspring eruptions that destroyed a lot. There
Yep.
was even one wellspring eruption called the Great Disenchantment, where basically every magic item in the world except for artifacts and legendary items just got disenchanted. So that was huge.
Yeah.
Then there was after that comes the Restoration, which was kind of like another Renaissance period, followed by the Age of Extinction, which is the age that they're in now, which was started by the Grave Rot Plague.
Right.
And I haven't decided whether or not by the end of the campaign whether or not that age will end and start with something new. And something that I noticed when I was going through all these different ages is that Aellorah seems to go through a cycle of like death and rebirth. With a really bad age followed by a good age.
Hmm.
And so now they're in a bad age, but it wasn't it wasn't natural. Like what started the age wasn't a natural process. So the question is, what's coming next? Another good age or another bad age?
Or do you have to change the age using an unnatural process as well?
Yeah. So that's something I have to think about. So that's the timeline. And then, so Lotus.
Yeah.
This is a kind of new landmass that I decided to add to the fray. So now instead of just Arak, Gother, Reshik, and Mir, we have Lotus, which compared to the rest of them, it's not really a continent. It's more of an island, and it's kind of situated, sandwiched in between Arak and Gother, down towards the south. And basically, a wellspring anomaly. There's two wellspring anomalies associated with this island. Basically, during the Age of Creation, after humans were created, some of them migrated to this island and established a settlement there. And then a wellspring eruption basically trapped them there by creating this anomaly around the island where anyone who approaches the island, they kind of get a geas placed on them, telling them, go away. And they forget that it's even there and they just, continue on their voyage. And so, nobody except the humans has been to this island and nobody even knows it exists. And so the humans on this island, they have one settlement called Wolvenhold. And they basically are confined to the north of the island because the south of the island is covered in another wellspring anomaly called the Gloom. And the Gloom is a relatively new a wellspring anomaly. And basically, the south of the island is covered in this like dark mist. And when they try to explore in there are these creatures called Gloomwolven, which are like wolves that are made out of this dark mist, and they just if you enter that mist, they can detect you no matter where you are, and they will just hunt you down and kill you. And the gloom has been like slowly creeping north. And then one day, out of nowhere, the humans were exploring one of the northern shores and found some guy lying on the beach. And turns out he had been shipwrecked, and he just the geese had no effect on him because he was unconscious.
Right.
And so he wakes up, and they're very surprised to see something they've never seen before, an elf. Because previously it was only humans here, and they had no idea that other races existed. So this is their first elf. And it turns into almost an apocalypse now situation where they think he's some sort of god, and because he has access to very basic magic, just like cantrips, like ability to cast light, and they can't do that. They don't know magic, so he's like a god to them, and he's having, instead of like taking advantage of the situation, he's very freaked out. He's thinking, oh god, they're going to discover me, what the hell do I do? And so he's, praying to Lise, trying to get help, but, she's not replying because there's a non-interference pact that the Seven Sisters have agreed to where they don't interfere with mortal affairs. And so he's on his own, and believe it or not, he manages to be the solution to their problems with the gloom, where even though it's basic magic, his ability to conjure light has given them the ability to banish the gloom. And, it's only temporary. It doesn't destroy the gloom, but it gives them the ability to explore the gloom safely. And he has started teaching this magic to other members of Wolvenhold, and they're called light bearers.
Mm-hmm.
So this elf's name is kind of a wacky name, but his name is Galathrath Ravern.
Okay.
It was another one of those randomly generated names, man. Come on, don't give me shit.
Sure.
But yeah, so that's basically where I am with that island now. There's not a whole lot of information for it, but I thought it was time that I start adding information to other areas of the world. And there's a big sandy landmass off the western coast of Iraq that I actually started working on as part of the campaign. Like, it's going to be part of the like final 2 chapters. It's called the Dreaming Wastes.
Uh-huh.
And I won't go into details about that because there's not much to say, and it would be spoilers for the players. But basically, completely desolate area that is off limits. It's like a travel ban because it's extremely dangerous.
Gotcha.
Oh, and I guess I also gave a name to an island off the western coast of Mir called the Scablands, which is like a penal colony for exiles from the Commonwealth. Because the Commonwealth, that's the halfling civilization, they have a mandatory military service period for members of their community, and those who refuse, they're exiled to the Scablands.
Okay. Yeah, kind of like Australia.
Yeah, basically. Oh, only they're not going down under. But yeah, that's pretty much all the major things that I've worked on in the last year and a half.
You had another word here, Aram Conlang?
Oh, yeah, so that's the language of magic that I was talking about that I
Oh,
developed.
okay. Gotcha.
And it's still, like, I'm still working on it very slowly because, this isn't something that needs to be done. This isn't going to enhance my game all that much. I just figured it would be cool to start creating constructed languages to use to name things. But specifically, the Orem conlang, that's specifically just because I wanted to play around with creating a language of my own and like structure it like a programming language.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's just a mental exercise for myself. But one of the things I wanted to start doing was I wanted to create some other constructed languages for the different cultures around the world, and then use those constructed languages to name things. So even though I have names for every settlement in my world right now, probably a lot of them I'm going to change once I create those naming languages.
Okay.
Because basically a naming language is it's a you create the grammar and syntax for it, but you don't create like an actual vocabulary or rules for how the like structure of the language is, like how to speak it. You just create the grammar and the syntax so that you can generate words that you can use that sound like this language.
Okay.
And then you can just create names for things.
I don't know. I never thought much about language creation in a long time. It's something I did when I was a kid, but since then I've mostly just been borrowing from other languages when I want something that
I'm pretty
sounds
sure
different.
every kid at some point tries to create their own language.
Gotta have a code to talk with your friends, right?
Yeah. I mean, don't all generations do that anyway? Because I mean, I can't understand what the hell Gen Z is saying.
Yeah, I guess slang is kind of a method of code generation. It's not explicit, but it basically is. It is a way to signal that you are in an in-group.
Yeah, it's not a new language. It's just a language evolving over time.
Right.
Although I really hope that we don't have teachers in the future teaching students what no cap means.
Probably not.
Yeah.
Not outside of like a college English class that looks at slang, because that is still something. There are like anthropology courses that look at how languages evolve over time, and that is one of the things that's looked at is slang and how slang can eventually become sort of ingrained within a language where it isn't really slang anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Like I think awesome is one that's like that, where that originally had a meaning that was more like almost like biblical, like a something that is awe-inspiring or is like a god, like an angel.
Or like for New Englanders when they say wicked.
Wicked, cool, or other ones that kind of have gotten just sort of accepted as slang and aren't really thought of that way anymore, even though they were at some point.
Yeah.
And other ones that just feel like old slang, like groovy, like it's like everyone knows what that means, but it's still kind of slang because people will look at you weird if you say it now, just because it's not really the way people talk anymore.
Yeah. Or totally tubular.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Oh man, if I think about all the slang that we had in the 90s.
Yeah, I think totally is still used, but yeah, tubular is not a thing anymore.
Yeah, this isn't what was that, the 60s or 70s? But yeah, I mean, it was great to get to talk about my world again because even though it's been over a year since the first episode came out, I still link it to people occasionally, even as recently as today.
Well, yeah, it was great having you again, Darin. Yeah, it's good talking with you.
Yeah, and I hope that maybe in the future I can come back and do a third episode. And I don't know how long you plan to take this, but I'd be interested to see how many other episodes we got coming up in the works, because I got an alert set, and I definitely want to keep listening.
All right, thanks, man. Quick reminder that I'm looking for people to go on the show, so if you or someone you know would be interested, please direct yourself or them to gocorral.com/SDS. That's GOCORRAL.com/SDS.